Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here for my LCS Week 1 overview, analysis, and of course, at the end, my updated power rankings. It is finally LCS time. I know this is coming a little bit later into the week than it normally would. Just trying to get things back on track as the season starts, but of course, we're going to be trying to get those out every single weekend for you guys with the LCS now being moved to Thursdays and Fridays, and so a lot of really good action this week, obviously, to kick off the season. I'm very excited to go over some of these games, some surprises, some upsets, some teams performing, some teams not so much, and I think it's all going to be fun to talk about. So if you guys are excited as well, let me know down in the comment section below. Let me know what your favorite game of the week was. Was it one that you maybe expected to like, or was it a battle between two teams that you didn't think was going to be nearly as entertaining as it was? Of course, let me know all that down in the comment section below, but let's not waste too much time. We've got a lot of games to cover, 10 of them, in fact, so let's go ahead and jump right into the first one here, and we kicked off the LCS season in 2023 with a rematch of the finals from summer of last year, 2022. We had Cloud9 taking on 100 Thieves, and I was really excited to see how this game would play out. I'm pretty low on 100 Thieves in the grand scheme of things. I had them at number 5 in my power rankings, where Cloud9, I feel like they're going to have a nice level of synergy going into the year. I have them at number 2, and you know what? Cloud9 looked really good here, especially the players that I wanted to see the most out of. Cloud9 really found success towards the back half of last year with playing through Berserker, really going into that bot lane, really trying to take advantage of the skill gap, really, that he can create against pretty much every other AD carry in the region. And so it was actually really comforting to see C9 come out and do something a little bit different here against a team that is relatively top level. You want to play towards this top side, and it absolutely worked out. Fudge went absolutely nutty on K'Sante. He controlled this entire game. He was really never in danger, and he was creating so much pressure for 100 Thieves. When I talk about K'Sante being a super overpowered and broken champion on this channel, it's games like this that give me that kind of belief. If you are a good top laner and you get to play, you know, someone that you can probably beat on K'Sante, you are unstoppable. There is literally nothing that this champion cannot do if you are winning. And you know what? Fudge looked fantastic for it. He's going to be getting my player of the game, although I don't think it was quite as easy as just Fudge was the only player on Cloud9 to look good. I think everybody looked good on Cloud9, but you have to remember this was a team that finished 5th in the regular season last year, trying to play through mid lane, trying to play through top lane, and then as soon as they figured out that, you know, playing through bot was kind of the way they are going to win games, they, you know, catapulted, they skyrocketed to the top of the standings. And so for Fudge to really come out here and dominate on K'Sante against a really good, you know, talent and a really good prospect in Tenacity, you know, not the best of full-time LCS debuts. We'll get to them in a bit, but Fudge looked really good here. It's really promising to see him come out and be as good as he was in week number 1. The other player here that I really need to spotlight, although everybody on Cloud9, like I said, did really well, but the other player you have to spotlight is Blabber here on the Wukong. Wukong, kind of a pick that's fallen a bit out of meta here, but Blabber plays these aggressive early game champions, these almost gank-oriented ones, but ones that are going to be super influential when you transition to the late game team fights incredibly successfully. His skirmish ability is higher than basically anybody in the league. There's a reason I have him as my number 1 jungler, and it's because I think his versatility and his ability to push his team forward is going to be more consistent than basically anybody else in the league. He is always going to make his team better. There really is no exception to that. And he did that here. Obviously, the comp, I think, is really interesting. You have a lot of skirmish potential, I would say, on the top side with K'Sante, with the Akali, but you're also going into some relatively, you know, beefy upper, you know, top side champions on the side of 100 Thieves here, in the Jax, in the Viego, in the Sylas. Not really a lot of easy paths to being able to take them down in the early game. However, I think Blabber did a really good job of navigating the early game, being able to generate that lead for Cloud9, and then being able to push forward. Him and Fudge were unstoppable for the mid portion of this game, and really they just took a lead that they had and exacerbated it into oblivion. And so Fudge and Blabber, for me, are probably the 2 big standout players of Cloud9 in this game. However, credit to Diplex. I know a lot of people have been talking about how Diplex maybe shouldn't be starting for this Cloud9 team. A lot of people talk about, you know, the import problem, etc., etc. Even someone like Eminus really popping off right now in the NACL. You know, you're looking at Diplex as someone who really does have something to prove, probably the most of anybody here on Cloud9, and he had a really solid game number 1 going into Bjergsen, who is one of the best mids in the region. Let's not get that twisted. I know people are low on him, but let's not try and overcomplicate things. Akali, into Silas, not always a matchup that you're going to be able to dominate early, but Diplex was honestly just better in this game. Obviously, having a jungler that was pushing ahead helped a lot, but Diplex also helped Blabber out, creating that pressure in the mid lane and allowing him to play more aggressive in those river trades. And so overall, I would say the top side of Cloud9 just looked fantastic. That was really what you wanted to see. They had the major question marks going into this series. Out of the 5 players, it was definitely top side, I think, that had more question marks, and I think Cloud9 definitely answered them here. Berserker and Sven were also good on this Ashe Heimerdinger. They just didn't really need to be perfect, you know what I mean? They were good. They were weak side, and they played well on weak side. They went into a super weird bot lane, which we'll get into in a second, but they made it look good. And so overall, Cloud9 looking really, really solid in their opening game of the year. As for 100 Thieves, not exactly how you want to start the season off. Basically, nobody on this team was able to get ahead at any point. Really good job from Cloud9 to be able to strangle them out from the mid game, but I am going to have to give a dead of the game, and unfortunately for me, that is going to go to Closer here on the Viego. I just think he got out-jungled pretty heavily by Blabber in the early game. He really wasn't able to create hardly any pressure on this Viego pick. I'm definitely lower on Viego right now than I think some other people are. I do think he can transition and scale into the late game, but I do think you need a lot of pressure on the map in order for you to be able to pick something like Viego. You need to be able to make sure that when you get to those late game team fights, even if Viego is not ahead, you're still going to be able to be relatively even in that early to mid game if the enemy jungler picks, something like a Wukong, perhaps something like an Elise that is playable right now, even a Maokai. Obviously, both of those were banned in this game, but just, things that you can play really aggressively. I'm not sure Viego is the pick. I know Closer plays it super well, but he definitely got out-tempoed this game, and that's kind of the big problem with the champion, and so he's going to get my dead of the game. He didn't make any necessarily, massive mistakes. It was more so just the fact that he was constantly behind on the side of 100 Thieves, and really, it kind of bled into the rest of his lanes. It affected a lot of the rest of the team, and I think that was a bit problematic, but that is certainly not the only problem I have with draft. Let's just talk about it. Let's get it out of the way. Azir support? What? This is the first game of LCS all year long, and we're getting Azir support coming out from Busio in his first ever LCS game. Certainly a bold decision coming out from 100 Thieves, but clearly they had practiced this. Clearly they felt comfortable. It just didn't really work. I understand if you feel like this is going to be strong as a poke, threat in lane, perhaps something that can beat up on the Heimerdinger in particular, but man, is it squishy, and man, is it frail, and man, is it exploitable, and that's kind of what happened here. There was really never a time where the bot lane ever had a ton of push in lane, mostly because if Azir was going to step up into something like an Ashe Heimerdinger, especially post 6, he's just going to get arrowed, and he's probably just going to die. There's really not a lot that you can do to peel that off, and so Busio ended up having to play really safe because they weren't able to have the push in the first, 4 levels, and then after that, it was doomed. It was basically doomed. Credit to Bjergsen and Tenacity. I do think they tried to make some plays as the game went on. Tenacity, especially in the top lane, I think was trying. Bjergsen also had, in my opinion, a better game than I think people will give him credit for, but by that point, by the time they were stepping up and actually playing the game relatively okay, the game was over, and so it didn't really matter all that much. Overall, 100 Thieves, definitely a little bit of a struggle bus to start out the year, but it's against one of the better teams in the league. I don't like the draft at all. I'm definitely going to say that that contributes, I almost said contributes, that contributes to my low opinion of the team in this game. I do think they still have talent, but I'm not particularly surprised with how this game went for them. I just think they're going to need to bounce back against maybe a team that they should be able to beat later in the week. And then Cloud9, on the other hand, great way to start your season. Obviously, you've had some tumultuous, back and forth over the past month. You lost your head coach, and so you were really needing to come out and I think make the opening salvo and the opening part of this season look strong, and they did that here. Fudge and Blabber in particular look absolutely fantastic. If they're able to keep that up on the top side, we know that Berserker is going to be able to carry from the bot side, and so if you have that dichotomy of being able to play through anywhere, I always talk about how that makes a team so much more dangerous, and I definitely think Cloud9 could be going into the rest of the season looking like a contender to run it back here in spring. Moving on to our second game here of day number 1. We had one that I was actually personally very interested in seeing. A top team versus a middle team, but I certainly think that middle teams in the LCS this year are going to cause some panic, and that almost happened in this one, as we saw Evil Geniuses take on Golden Guardians. EG was able to pick up the win, but this was certainly no pushover. It was certainly no rollover, and so overall, really, really fun game to watch. 43 minutes of back-and-forth action. EG is able to come out on top, but it's certainly not always clean. You'll notice that I have player of the game and dead of the game on the same team. I usually try and reserve this for when, you know, the game isn't exactly won by the team that maybe deserved to win, but I do think EG deserved to win. I just don't think there was any other option for dead of the game this game than JoJo, but we'll get into that in just a bit. Let's start off with EG's positives, and that for me is going to be the jungle and the bot lane. Really, really encouraging stuff here from these three players. Inspired looking great on the Sejuani. Obviously, this is a pick that he has been really good on in the past. Someone that can facilitate really well for the enemy team. Can skirmish a little bit early depending on the laners that you have with you, but mostly is going to be there to make sure that the rest of the team can do their job. Inspired's pathing has always been top-notch, better than pretty much anybody else in North America, and that definitely showed itself here. Now, this is not a discredit to River. We will get into that in a bit, but just because Inspired played well does not mean River played bad. River was fantastic on the side of Golden Guardians. Inspired just also played really well this game, but if you're going to give a lot of the big credit towards the back half of this game, these team fights in the late game, you got to give the credit to FBI, who was fantastic here. He's going to get my player of the game. I was hyping him up a lot before the season started. I got a lot of comments that were definitely a little bit lower on FBI as a player, someone who said he was not going to be able to come in and replace Danny at that same level, but I had faith that he would be able to. I know last year was probably his worst year as a pro in North America, but I had faith that he was going to be a lot closer to 2020 and 2021 than he was, what he was in 2022, and through one game, that looks pretty good. He was really, really good on the Jhin here, obviously. Jhin kind of a low damage ADC, not someone that you would expect to be able to take over a lot of these late game team fights, but it really is crazy what happens when you auto attack on Jhin. FBI has always been really good at being able to do consistent damage in team fights. Sometimes he puts himself in bad positions to do it, but for the most part, he is going to be very consistent in a lot of these team fights. He is going to be able to play them out, and honestly, this is the kind of FBI that I was expecting to get as we went into the year. Someone who was going to be incredibly solid. Vulcan helped him out a lot in lane on the Ashe, making sure to have that Karma be a little bit less of a nuisance in lane. Obviously, Karma into Jhin is very difficult to play for Jhin, just because you're pretty often just going to be shoved into your tower. Stixxay is going to have a ton of prio in that lane, typically speaking, although Ashe neutralizes that a lot, and I think Vulcan did a really good job on that, but FBI really was the one in the late game, in my opinion, that was winning the game for Evil Geniuses. His damage was absolutely absurd. Now, I would be remiss not to point it out, but my dud of the game for this one is going to go to Jojo Pyun in the mid lane. Now, again, this is no flame to Jojo. Everyone knows I love Jojo as a player, but this is kind of the reason why I didn't have him as the #1 mid laner going into the year in North America, because he will have some games that are just like this, right? He will have some games where he's just too over-aggressive. He's taking every single Varus Q. River's kind of trying to exploit that mid lane as much as possible. He's just kind of being a target point on the side of Golden Guardians, and that's okay. Like, it's certainly, you can have games like that, but it just makes me a little bit more weary, or wary, I think is the correct one, of his, regular season performances. He's going to have some games that he just straight up wins for his team by himself, but he will also have some games like this on a support champion in Azir. I kid. But on a champion like Azir, where he's just way too far forward, not really in a position to actually play the game all that well, and definitely not necessarily driving EG forward. It's okay, though. He's still really solid in these team fights. The Azir was doing damage. I think you could say very similar things about a player I do end up liking a lot in Someday. I think Someday, I was expecting him to come into this Evil Geniuses team and be kind of this rock, this anchor. Didn't necessarily show it in game #1. He is playing his signature Jax, but Licorice was kind of a little bit of a tough nut to crack in the top lane for this Jax, and for Someday, I just think he needs to get back to maybe a more passive mentality if this team is going to play more towards the mid and the bot lane. That's not a bad thing. If you want to play towards topside with a Jax pick like this, you want Someday to go in and be super aggressive, I think that's fine. The problem is that Someday didn't necessarily have the map pressure and the backup to be able to justify a lot of the plays that he ended up making in this game. And so, a couple of question marks from the solo laners, but for the most part, still a very good game from Evil Geniuses. On the side of Golden Guardians, I actually don't think they played bad at all. They held tough with Evil Geniuses for basically the whole game, and River in particular was actually really good. One thing worth noting that I haven't pointed out yet, Gory is not here yet. Visa issues are, striking the entire country so far, and so Young, who's actually been fantastic for Golden Guardians Challengers in the NACL to start off the year, is filling in the mid lane, easily the best player on Golden Guardians Challengers, and so to see Young filling in, honestly, I think he will be fine at an LCS level. He was okay in this game, certainly not spectacular, but he doesn't have to be. He's got a lot of good teammates around him that should be able to do stuff in games. He's not gory, and he's not just going to be able to win the game through mid lane, but he's not a bad player by any means, in my opinion, either. And so, Let's go ahead and talk about what Golden Guardians did this game. River looked great on this Wukong. Honestly, Wukong globally has looked like a very weak pick, I think, in the grand scheme of LPL, LCK, LEC, you know, leading up to this. But the first 2 games here in the LCS, Wukong looks incredibly strong. River is able to contend with a lot of these skirmish plays in the River. I think Licorice and Young do a good job of being able to rotate to help for a lot of those plays, but River does a really good job of being able to make sure that Inspired isn't just taking over the map. That's what I always talk about here in my jungle matchup, like overview and analysis, is that if you can generate a lot of pressure on the map, if you can control when and where wards are placed, or when and where you know the jungler is going to be at any given time, if you can manipulate and control a lot of those things, you're probably just going to win the game. There really isn't a lot that the enemy jungler can then do to expedite the process. You just have every single advantage at your disposal, and so to kind of take that away, even in a situation where the teams are relatively even, I think was super to the benefit of Golden Guardians. And River, you know, he was great for Dignitas in spring of last year. We talked about this in my player ranking. River was great for Dignitas in spring last year. He definitely fell off a lot in summer, not only for Dig, but when he got to Golden Guardians, he really wasn't all that good. If he can get back to spring form of 2022, River is a very, very good player, and this team is going to be very competitive. But unfortunately, the bot lane just kind of got outplayed. Stixxay and Huhi were not on the same level as FBI and Vulcan, and that just is what it is, right? You really can't expect them to be. Stixxay is not as good of a player as FBI is. Huhi is probably just not as good of a player as Vulcan is. They just got the shove in, and there was really not a lot they could do. FBI was way more consistent in a lot of these team fights. And so overall, not a bad game from Golden Guardians. They certainly had advantages and positives, but they just weren't able to pick up the win. I do think that when you're looking at them coming in at number 8 and being able to perform like this is a very good sign for the league as a whole, that a team like this, even without maybe their big carry player in the mid lane, is able to push a team like Evil Geniuses as hard as they did. Now, EG didn't necessarily play it perfectly, but I do want to give more credit to Golden Guardians than I want to take away from Evil Geniuses, because Golden Guardians, I do think, actively made plays this game, kept it close. They just weren't able to take it in these late game team fights. This could be a team that I can see moving potentially up in the standings and in the power rankings and everything if, you know, some other teams kind of disappoint, but it's just going to be interesting to see where exactly they land as the season moves on. For Evil Geniuses, though, you're going to be happy to be able to pick up a win. A few mistakes, a few minor inconveniences here when it comes to the solo laners, but you got enough from your jungle and you got enough from your bot lane to be able to pull out the win here. If you can clean up those mistakes, if you get the best version of Someday and JoJo, I think I'll probably have been spot on with my #1 ranking in the power rankings. Moving on to game number 3 here of day 1. We certainly had a fun one. This is one of the matches I was most looking forward to over the course of the entire week 1 in the LCS. We had a battle between Team Liquid and FlyQuest. Of course, a lot of talking happening before this game, a lot of promises made from a couple of these players. Of course, I don't believe those are going to be coming true, but worth noting that there was a lot of hype and a lot of excitement going into this game coming out from both sides, and FlyQuest definitely able to get the better of them in this first game off the back of pretty much everything that you could possibly want to see from this FlyQuest team. First, I want to say this. I want to get it out of the way. Yes, FlyQuest got everything they wanted in draft. Impact got his best champion. Spica got the strongest champion in the meta. Prince got Zeri. Like, Zeri Lulu for Prince? Like, yes, please. FlyQuest basically got everything they wanted in this draft. I really don't like the prep work that TL did for this, but they still had to play it out. It's not like TL is full of bad players that just aren't going to be able to play from a neutral game state, even if FlyQuest, you know, has the champions that they like to play. Unfortunately for TL, FlyQuest did capitalize on a lot of that, and a lot of the players that they did give over the primary champions to ended up playing really, really, really well and kind of destroying them in this game. But it is what it is. Sometimes you're going to win in draft, sometimes you're going to lose in draft. I don't think this was quite like a lose in draft from a champion perspective, but maybe from a champions given to the team kind of perspective. And I think that really starts off in the top lane here. Obviously, Summit should be better than Impact. Impact probably had his worst split in a very long time last summer on Evil Geniuses. He was a little bit of a problem for that team. I expected a little bit of a bounce back this year, and you know what? Great start to the year for him. He's going to get player of the game in game number 1 for FlyQuest. Solo kills Summit on the Gangplank. That is absolutely fantastic. That is basically everything that you could want to see. One of the flashiest solo kills I've seen in a while, obviously flashing out, dancing, I mean, complete and utter BM on the side of Impact, but super fun stuff to watch if he can continue to play like that. Very similar to how he played on Evil Geniuses in 2021 when he first joined that organization. I mean, he's going to be an absolute menace. You can make a real case that he was the best top laner in the league in 2021, as recently as 2 years ago. If he can get back to that point throughout the rest of this year, if he can be solo killing Summit regularly throughout the split are players, you know, of that caliber, that's going to be absolutely huge for FlyQuest. There aren't really going to be a lot of teams that can actively deal with that. Also want to give a big shout out to this bot lane. Big surprise. Prince is really, really good. The more I was thinking about this, the more I was realizing that a lot of the players that I was talking about in my power rankings video, some of these LCK players that have been brought over to NA and really haven't succeeded, basically from moment one, a lot of them were players that were on really good teams, but weren't necessarily the best players on those teams, right? You're thinking back to players like Crown, players like Bang. Obviously, no offense to them. They are very good players. They're better than most players in League of Legends history. They won a world championship after all. Looper's another one that comes to mind from many, many moons ago. And you think back to kind of the prevailing thought and the prevailing, you know, what is the common denominator in a lot of this? And it's good players on great teams and having their value maybe be propped up for that. That's not Prince. Like, that is just not who Prince was last year. He was a player who was dragging his team across the finish line. Prince very well just could be the best player in LCS right now. Like, and it could not be even close with anybody else, and it takes no adjusting. He's the best from moment one. He will be the best all year long. That wouldn't surprise me really all that much. Prince was fantastic in this game. He gave him his signature Zeri, and he absolutely popped off on this. In teamfights, it's absolutely difficult for him to be caught out and taken down on this champion. His positioning is just so perfect most of the time. Add that on to the fact that Winsome did a really good job of filling in here for Ayla. Obviously, again, visa issues, he's not here, so Winsome is in at support, and he did a really good job of peeling off for Prince. This game, I actually thought he was pretty fantastic. Spica did a really good job on the Maokai, setting the tempo for the whole game. He just out-jungled Pyosik, and it really wasn't all that close. And Vikla was good, too. He didn't really have to do all that much, but he was fine. He was kind of the target for Team Liquid for a majority of this game, but he was fine. He didn't really have a huge negative impact on the game. It was really Impact, in my opinion, in the top lane that definitely deserved player of the game and was really, really, you know, showing up on that top side. And then Prince and Winsome in the bot lane, who also looked very good. For Team Liquid, definitely not how you wanted to start the year. You really wanted to see some of these players maybe step up a tad bit more, although it's not necessarily the players that you thought were going to be the problem that were the problem. It was top side of the map that was a little bit of an issue. Pyosik is going to get my dud of the series, or my dud of the game here. I had a lot of comments on my power rankings video, my player rankings video for North America, that Pyosik was ranked too low as the number 3 jungler because he had just won the World Championships, and I kind of talked about this a lot in that video, but pretty much everybody who was talking Pyosik up like he was just going to stomp the league and he had no problems and he was dominant, I don't think they watched the LCK last year. I think that there were so many things that were concerning about Pyosik's tape in 2022, and it wasn't just 2022. He's kind of always been that player that will win some games and then, like, really, really lose some games, right? The coin flip potential of Pyosik as a player is just higher than basically any other player in the LCS. I think JoJo's up there as well, obviously, but Pyosik is more coin flippy. At least JoJo, I think, can contribute in the late game if he's not doing well. Pyosik will just lose you games basically by himself. And that's kind of what he did here. Really bad game from him on the Vi. Got completely out-jungled by Spica on the Maokai. You can't really give over Maokai. Don't really like that decision at all, even if you are trading it for the Lucian Nami, which I do think is good. I don't love giving over the Maokai, especially against a jungler who is known to struggle into more oppressive junglers, right? And then, honestly, the other player that I didn't think played all that well was actually Summit in the top lane on this Jax. You really wanted to see a lot more out of Summit, but Impact was just better, and that's not really what you wanted to see. Summit was super good for Cloud9 in spring of last year, and also pretty good for FPX in summer of last year as well, because he was able to dominate laning phase. That was really his crux, is that he was able to be up 20-25 CS every single game, and if he's not beating a player like Impact, no offense to Impact, he's a really good player, but when you look at Impact's 2022, and basically his whole career, at least ever since he left Cloud9, like since he entered Team Liquid, Impact's weakness has been laning phase. He is a fantastic team fighter, arguably the best at his position in the entire region, but laning has always been a little bit of his issue, and Impact was just better in lane on Gangplank into Jax, which is just basically unacceptable. I don't really think that there is a way you can justify that, and so Summit and Pyosik simply have to be better, because I do think some of the other players on this team actually played okay. Harry, in particular, surprised me a lot. I was really worried about him. I thought he was for sure going to be the weakness of this team going into this season, or at least at the beginning of it. He was really good in game number 1 here on the Syndra. He kept up with Vikla, and it was certainly not an overwhelming mid lane advantage. They put a lot of pressure into that mid lane spot, and Harry actually paid them off for them. The Syndra was really strong, and I think with a better team around him, he perhaps could have won this game for his team, but unfortunately by the time we got to these late game team fights, the Zeri and the Gangplank were so strong that, like, what is a Syndra exactly going to do against them, especially when you have a Maokai coming in. Even the Azir on the backline was doing a ton of damage, and so, you know, shout out to Harry. I thought he was fine, but the rest of the team just kind of crumbled around him. That top side for TL simply has to be better. Summon and Pioshik were just not good enough in this game. There really is no excuse for it. If they're not better, this team is going to struggle for the rest of the year because they are predicated on this top side winning. Pioshik has to be more consistent. He has to be the version that we saw of him at Worlds and not the version that we saw of him for the most part in the LCK last summer where he got benched for Juhan in the qualification for the World Championships. And Summit just has to start winning lane. Like, there is no excuse for that either. He has to start winning lane. This team is entirely predicated on that top side winning because Yeon and Core JJ just aren't going to be the strong side of the map. And so Team Liquid really needs to start getting some improvements from their big imports if this team wants to really contend this summer. And then for FlyQuest, great start to the year. Everybody on this team looks fantastic, maybe with the exception of Vikla, but I have the expectation that he will turn it around. FlyQuest is just a really solid team. I expect them to be able to dispatch basically anybody who is, you know, kind of on that lower bracket because their talent gap is just that much bigger than everybody else's, and Team Liquid, I think, unfortunately falls into that. It'll be interesting to see what happens when FlyQuest starts going up against some of the better teams in the league, you know, your Cloud9s, your Evil Geniuses, etc., etc. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch, but for now, you know, watching them take on a team like Team Liquid, it just seems like they're not even on the same playing field. Jumping into game number 4 here of day 1, we had probably one of the more intriguing matchups of the day between two teams that are actually really close in skill level, or at least are projected to be close in skill level. We had a matchup between Counter Logic Gaming and Dignitas, obviously two longtime orgs here in North America, 2 of the original 8 in North America, and CLG was able to pick up a huge win here. Now, Dignitas on paper looks like a team that maybe has a little bit more upside. Players like Santorin and Jensen coming in, potentially being this big, you know, organization changer for Dignitas. They finally got some players that can play. Well, CLG is no pushover. This is a team that finished 4th in the regular season last year, 5th in total. They made no changes. This is the same roster, obviously. I went over that in my Power Rankings video. To see them come out at the beginning of the year and look really strong to start the year, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. This is the time of the year where they probably will be the strongest comparatively to the rest of the teams. They've had the most time to play together. They've had the most time to synergize, and they certainly looked it in this game. You can look at the scoreline of 10-6 and be like, oh, it was a little bit close. It really wasn't that close. This was CLG from the beginning, and it was basically everybody on the CLG side winning, which I'll talk about in a bit. But player of the game for me in game number 4 here is going to go to Luger in the bottom lane. Now, Luger really has been the player that I've hyped up the most on this CLG team over the course of the past year, and I definitely think that's come to fruition in their first game. Here, he continues to look fantastic. They take away a lot of the big name AD carries here. Lucian's gone, Zeri's gone, so you're moving down the priority list, and Luger ends up going for the Ezreal. Ezreal we've seen pulled out, be pulled out, I should say, at multiple levels across multiple regions so far, and he's been okay. I think in the situations where he's played by someone who plays Ezreal really well, he looks really good, and I think that's what happened with Luger here, is Luger and Poom, quite frankly, were just better than Spawn and Biofrost. It really wasn't all that close. Poom also was a lot better than he was last year. I'm not going to say that Poom was really bad last year by any means, but there were certainly moments in a lot of these games where CLG would have some leads, and then Poom would just randomly walk into the jungle and die. Like, that was something that Poom would do over the course of last year. This game felt a lot more controlled. It felt a lot more, you know, okay, we have the lead, now let's do everything we need to in order to end this game as quickly as possible. Also, some awesome arrows from Poom going topside, being able to hit someone like Armut, and being able to have Dokla and Contracts be able to punish that. Some really fun cross-map plays here from CLG, but overall, bot lane, in my opinion, really the big area of strength from CLG in game number 1, especially Luger, but credit to Palafox here on the Victor. He was able to go relatively even with Jensen in lane, and then do a lot of damage in these late game team fights. Contracts really outplayed Santorin in the early game on this Sejuani. This is something we're seeing relatively frequently across every single region in the world, is that Sejuani does a really good job of dealing with someone like Vi in the early game. Vi really has no pressure into someone like Sejuani, and if you get behind on Vi, you are relatively useless. As a champion, you don't really do enough damage, you don't really tank enough damage, you don't really do anything besides ult and die, and I've talked about that in a lot of my videos, but it's worth reiterating here that Contracts played the early game really well, didn't allow Santorin to get any sort of advantage, and then just kind of outscaled him into the mid game. And then let's talk about Dokla. You're looking at the scoreline and you're maybe saying like, oh, maybe Dokla didn't have as good of a game. Maybe he was kind of the weak link here. Dokla made some fantastic plays on this Gangplank. He was doing a ridiculous amount of damage and he was really kind of bodying Armut in that top lane matchup. But Dokla is the kind of player where he will have a lead and then he will continue to try and make plays. And sometimes he'll walk into a 1v3 and die, right? That's just Dokla. But I think for the most part, he was really solid this game. Everybody on CLG looking really good. Huge first win of the season for them. And then for Dignitas, on the other hand, they just kind of looked a little bit passive, a little bit boring, if I'm being honest. I wanted to see a little bit more aggression, but this was kind of the thing I was worried about the most when it came to Dignitas going into the year, is you look at this big jungle mid acquisition, 2 legendary players at an LCS level of Santorin and Jensen, and neither of them are really super aggressive when it comes to how they like to play the game. They really have always been best as the second and third best players on whatever team that they're on, when they can really make one of those superstar level players look even better. But they don't really have that on Dignitas. They're kind of the 2 best players on the team, and so if the onus does fall on them to carry games, that maybe can get to a point where they can play a little bit too slow, and they certainly were too slow in this game. They just didn't really do anything. Dignitas just kind of rolled over and died. Really, it was Armut who was making a lot of plays on the top side, which you can kind of expect, obviously. Very aggressive player Armut is, but he's also going to make some mistakes. I think Dokla outplayed him for the most part in this game when it came to mechanics. He just was able to pull some back in a couple situations. Spawn is going to get my dud of the game here, mostly because him and Bio just got run over by Luger and Poom in lane. They were down the entire game, and there really wasn't a lot they could do, but they didn't really make any giant mistakes, which in a lot of scenarios is going to be fine. Like, if you're a bot laner, especially a young, pseudo, not actual, but pseudo rookie bot lane, playing with the substitute support here in Biofrost, you're probably not expected to be the big carry on the team, right? I'm high on Spawn and his mechanics and his ability to play at this level, but he shouldn't be the one that has been, that is given a ton of responsibility in order to win. The only problem was just that the rest of the team also didn't take it upon themselves to win the game, and so Spawn and Biofrost losing in the bottom lane and allowing Luger to get super far ahead and win the game for CLG was a little bit more of a problem than I think it would have been in a lot of other situations. And so for Dignitas, you're just kind of looking at this game saying like, I don't want to say that they could be like the Excel of the LCS, but it's kind of how they play, is they play really slow, they play really boring, they play really passive. If they're not able to kind of push forward and fight for some leads, take some of these, 60-40 plays, really try and take some fights in the mid game, try and push an advantage. If they're not able to do that, I think this team is going to struggle quite a bit. I think playing that slow in 2023 just is not a recipe for success, but there are a lot of players on this team that have experience winning, have experience playing at a top level in the LCS. There is a lot of time for this team to figure it out and adjust and get back on track. I just don't know if it's exactly there right now. They don't look like one of the teams that should be in the top 6 by the end of spring just after one game. And then CLG, on the other hand, look really solid. Obviously, we expected them to be able to come out and start the regular season on a really high note because they are returning all 5 members, and that really is a huge advantage for a lot of these teams. But they did it in a very nice fashion. They did it in a very concrete fashion, something that I can really get behind. Dokla looked a little bit inconsistent, but outside of that, pretty much everybody on CLG was exactly where they needed to be basically every single moment of the game, and that's always going to be a really good sign for a team as talented as CLG that has its consistency. And so for CLG, basically as good of a way as you could start the year. For Dignitas, definitely need to show some more things before I feel comfortable with them. Moving on to our final game here of day 1 in week 1 of LCS. We had an interesting one. 2 of the bottom teams in my power rankings, in fact, the 2 bottom teams in my power rankings coming to blows here in the final game of day 1. We had Immortals taking on TSM. And TSM was able to pick up a win, a pretty big win from them, if I do say so myself, obviously needing to pick up a win in a matchup like this. Both of these teams looking relatively soft on paper, at least compared to the rest of the league, that all, I would say, took major steps forward or have some, potential superstar on their team. I don't think either of these 2 teams necessarily had that on paper going into the season, but TSM in this one actually looking really good, and I perhaps could have been wrong about that, depending on how good Boogie is. Like, I don't want to overreact to just one game on a champion that he is very good at and has spent a lot of time on. This was the champion I profiled the most for him going into the season, was Elise, but he looked really good in this game, and it was in the way that you would not expect. You look at this comp, and you look at Lucianami, you look at Elise, even something like a Talia, and you're like, okay, there's going to be a lot of macro plays in the early game. We're talking a lot of 4, 5, 6-minute plays, level 4, really trying to go all in. But that really wasn't how TSM played this game. They played it much slower, And in some ways that was really bad, and in some ways that was really good from them. And so we'll kind of talk about that. Obviously, looking at the Immortals draft, they also do kind of want to get the ball rolling as quickly as possible. They've got a Draven, and they went with the Pyke as that support in the bot lane there. You really want to try to get that bot lane accelerated as quickly as possible. This is a Draven comp through and through, and so the Elise needs to make sure that she plays relatively safe so that the Draven doesn't accidentally snowball out of control. You don't want to do a level 3 dive bot lane and then just have Kenvi show up and have it turn completely, right? So Kenvi actually got a lot of pressure in the early game. He was actually active on the map, was making plays, was trying to get someone like Revenge pretty far ahead, even someone like Tactical and Fleshy. Like, they were given a lot of resources. However, most of the time that Kenvi spent on the map was going to be topside. You get to this mid game though, and this is where I think a lot of people forget about how some of these champions work. People look at Lucian Nami and they're like, oh, early game. Lucian Nami's not early game. Lucian Nami is your mid-game power spike. They spike at one item. Once you get that full completed item on Lucian, he becomes the strongest champion in the game. So once you're sitting there at 8 to 10 minutes, you're like, okay, now we can really fight. Elise, as a champion, another champion that I think gets completely misunderstood by most of the community. Yes, her level 3 and her level 4 is incredibly strong, but what she doesn't do is fall off in damage. A lot of people look at her as this early game only champion. She can do a lot of damage in the late game. The big problem with Elise is she has to put herself in harm's way to do so, and by the time in the game that, you know, a lot of these other champions hit their first item power spike, she is very susceptible to just being blown up in a lot of these fights. But her damage doesn't go away. If you can stack on a lot of these plays, if you can start getting the ball rolling, if you can get a lot of gold on the Lucian, if you can get a lot of gold on the Elise, these two can definitely still skirmish and fight a lot towards the mid part of the game. And that's where TSM really grew their lead. Now, I have some problems with how Immortals played this in general. I think you draft a Draven comp and then don't play around Draven. That's got to be relatively frustrating, although the Draven played really bad this game, and so that's certainly part of it. But credit to Boogie, who really went around the map and honestly dominated. He from basically 10 minutes onward into the game, I would say he had complete control of everything that Immortals wanted to do in the game. So much so, he's going to get my player of the game here. He was someone who I was definitely a little bit lower on going into the year. Kind of a mercenary, as I like to call them, going from region to region to region, kind of just, you know, finding a team where he can play at a top level, and NA was kind of that region here for TSM, and he actually looked really, really solid in game number 1. Big credit to the bot lane as well, most specifically Chime, who I don't think is going to get nearly enough credit for this Nami performance, was really doing a good job of enabling Neo to have no fear to go in and do basically whatever he wanted, but also setting Boogie up for a lot of really, really good plays. And so, overall, TSM looking great. I think Solo, Maple, everybody did their job on TSM in this game. No one overextended in the early game, no one made any major mistakes, and then, you know, a couple of good plays later, and all of a sudden you're winning the game. So that's kind of what you wanted to see from TSM, just a very controlled, calculated win. On the side of Immortals, not good. This was not a good game. You can look at the score lines and kind of glean that, but we have to remember, Immortals was actually up in gold for a bit of this game, mostly because you're looking at Pyke, you're looking at Draven. Even the Fiora in the top lane was actually doing really well. You had a lot of moments in this game where you were in decent spots. The problem was it just kind of all fell apart in that mid game, like I said. Kenvi lost control of the map pretty much completely. The Elise was everywhere, and the Sejuani had absolutely no business being in the places that she was in. And then Tactical and Ablaze Olive just completely ran it down. There was really no other way to put it. Ablaze Olive got completely hard camped by Boogie in the mid game, and Tactical's positioning is just horrendous. Like, it is, quite frankly, just awful. Like, there is no excuse for how bad he played in this game. He's gonna get my dud of the game. This very much felt like 2022 Tactical all over again. He was just in the wrong spot, doing the wrong thing basically the entire game, and in a Draven comp, built entirely around Draven, that's not good. That's not what you want to see. Fleshy could only help so much. The Pyke wasn't necessarily bad, but you know, Pyke Draven is a very risky bot lane, especially if you aren't able to get ahead. They are going to be relatively useless towards the back half of the game, and that's kind of what happened for Immortals. And then, like I said, Ablaze Olive was also just really bad in this game. He's someone who is just going to continue to, I think, prove that maybe he's just not at this level anymore. Not someone who I think is a bad player, but someone who certainly isn't going to lose gracefully. Unfortunately for Revenge, he goes 1-0-0, never dies, and loses the game. It kind of happens sometimes. The rest of your team just can't win, but it's not like he dominated this top lane matchup. He was just ahead, right? And so, overall, not a great game for Immortals. Certainly some things that I could see going better for them as the season goes on. But mid and bot, and mid ADC, your carry roles, they look bad. Like, they look like the worst in the league by a considerable margin. And by the way the team played in this game number 1, I don't really see them being able to take a lot of games, even against some of the bottom teams, because I don't think TSM is really outskilling them super hard, at least on paper. And so to see them kind of just fold and collapse under pressure like this is certainly not a good sign for this Immortals team. And then for TSM, great win. This is basically exactly what you wanted to see to start off the year, especially because your jungle looked so good. Neo looked good as well, and Chime, I think, is going to continue to prove himself to be one of the most underrated players in the entirety of the LCS. He is genuinely a great support at this level, and I don't think a lot of people will recognize that, but he had another really good game. And so overall, TSM might be looking a little bit spicy. They did beat up on a bad team in Immortals, but they're going to have the chance to kind of rectify that with a more important game later in the week. I'll just say this for now. Great start to the week for TSM. You couldn't really ask for anything better. Jumping into day 2 action now. We kicked off day 2 with certainly an interesting matchup. One that I actually was really excited to see. A top team on paper versus a team with some synergy. We had Counter Logic Gaming taking on Evil Geniuses, and CLG picks up a pretty massive win here. Obviously, I just talked about this a couple of games ago. CLG is in a prime position to really push forward at the beginning of the season due to their synergy, due to their ability to create in the mid game and then be able to transition into the late game maybe just a tad bit cleaner than a lot of the other teams, and that's basically exactly what happened in this game. It was CLG down like a lot, like 10k gold. Like Evil Geniuses was completely in control of this game. Inspired was super strong in the early game, was able to get a ton off on Elise to be able to generate a ton of gold for FBI and JoJo in particular on the Rise. And the Varus in this game, quite frankly, by all accounts, should have just been over. Evil Geniuses should not have been able to give up a lead like this, but slowly, surely, CLG fights their way back into the game. You're looking at this comp on the side of CLG. You're looking at Cassio, Sivir. You're looking at Jax in a side lane. This is actually a really difficult game to win. If you get to 44 minutes and 11 seconds, you know, random number thrown out off the top of my head. And you know what? It was very difficult for EG to win because they couldn't. They could not close it out. Luger ends up getting to 500 CS on Sivir, and once you get to 4 or 5 items on Sivir, there are very few champions in the game that are as strong as she is. She can just dominate team fights basically by herself without really any trouble. Huge ups to CLG for being able to stay in this game, not get mentally tilted, be able to know their win condition, to be able to know that they can go late, that they can fight late, and for them to be able to do it. Big credit to Luger and Poom. Luger's going to get my player of the game again, although I do think it is more of a team player of the game. It was very difficult to give it out to one player in particular, but those Sivir Qs at the end of the game were doing so much damage. The ricochets on W were doing so much damage. She was outputting a ridiculous amount. She was the reason they were able to win those late game team fights, and so for me, it's going to go to Luger, although, you know, the rest of the team kind of did a great job of making sure that he could get there in the first place, because, you know, it didn't really matter if he was going to do really well at 500 CS if the rest of the team didn't survive long enough to get him to 500 CS, and so you could give it to a lot of people. For me, it's going to go to Luger because he was the most influential in the late game team fight, but huge credit to Contracts. He played another really good game here on the Sejuani. He was out-jungled a bit in the early game by Inspired, but that's certainly not the worst thing in the world for a player like Contracts to say, especially going into Inspired's Elise. He was able to generate some leads, and then Contracts just kind of weathered the storm. He calmed the beast, he moved into the mid game and just kind of slowed things down. There wasn't a lot that EG was able to take because Contracts was controlling the map relatively well, and so you just get to this point where the game stagnates, and in about 35 minutes, you've essentially wasted 10 to 15 minutes of EG's time. They are getting stuff, but CLG is getting just as much with these small leads in these team fights, you know, these split push advantages that Dokla is creating. Overall, just a really good map performance from Contracts in particular, but also from the rest of the team. Again, credit to Dokla on this. Jax, you're looking at these two teams. They both have one really strong split pusher. On CLG side, you have the Jax. On EG side, you have the Rise, and so unfortunately, Rise is just really not able to deal with Jax all that well in a side lane. Of course, if you get on top of Rise, he's basically dead. There's really just not a lot you can do about that, and so for Dokla, it was really just about being able to push in, keep that pressure going, making sure that he's not overly caught in side waves, which he was sometimes, but for the most part, just making sure you're in a good spot and then allowing the rest of your team to scale. Again, you just hit that break point in the game where eventually you win. And so a lot of players on this team may be deserving of player of the game. It could go to Luger, it could go to Contracts, it could go to Dokla. I think all three played their roles essentially perfectly in this game. Big credit to all three of them. For me, it's going to go to Luger, but I think you could give it to any of them. On the side of Evil Geniuses, though, this has got to be a frustrating loss. I mean, I would be completely and utterly tilted if this was how I lost the game. You're looking at a 10k gold lead, right? With a comp like this, you have a Ryze, you have a Varus, you should be able to close this out. K'Sante, you have frontline, you've got backline, you should be able to win these team fights. Unfortunately, they just got outplayed towards the back half of this game. I'm going to give dud of the game to JoJo, and I'm going to explain a little bit here. Yes, he did some good in these team fights. He was putting out some damage, but you're looking at what EG needs, and what EG needed was a macro presence. They needed somebody in a side wave to be able to push forward and try to win that way, and you've got a Ryze. You've got somebody who can do that incredibly efficiently. But man, JoJo just simply did not want to do that in this game. He just simply wanted to team fight over and over and over again. And honestly, I do think that cost Evil Geniuses quite a bit. And so he is going to get my dud of the game here. I don't think he was particularly awful. I don't really think anybody on Evil Geniuses was particularly awful in this game. It was just JoJo who was constantly out of position, never really in the side lane when he needed to be, and constantly overstepping in team fights and being able to get caught by a lot of these CC abilities. And so for JoJo, he's just got to step it up. This is really, it's going to happen. I'm not going to sit here and flame JoJo. My opinion of him as a player really hasn't changed all that much over the course of the week, but it is worth noting that he has to be more consistent if this Evil Geniuses team does want to compete to be the best team in the league. He was super consistent over the course of summer last year for the most part. It definitely feels like he's taken a little bit of a regression back to what he was in spring of 2022 to start the year. Hopefully, it's just week 1 jitters and he can get back on track, but it's not like anybody else really played the late game all that well. Inspired and FBI both had really good early games, and they did nothing to transition that into the late game. Just got outscaled by the Sivir and the Sejuani. Really hit no point in the game where they felt like they were stronger than they were at 10 minutes, and that's not good for a team with a 10k gold lead. Vulcan and Someday really weren't going to do all that much, and so a lot of things that you need to corral in, that you need to adjust on the side of Evil Geniuses. You need to figure out what your mid to late game is going to look like. This was a problem for this team last year. Let's not put rose-tinted glasses on and pretend like, oh, well, last year they had Impact and they had Danny, and so their mid-games were always good. I would argue that Danny's mid-game was worse than FBI's last year, and I don't really think FBI played all that well in this game, and so that kind of shows you Danny was great in these late-game team fights, but his mid-game certainly was the weak point for me. And then you look at Impact, yes, I think the mid-game is where he really started to come into his own, but his early games were so bad that they were often at deficits over the course of summer. It's not this, like, one-to-one replacement thing of, oh, no more Impact, no more Danny, that means mid-game equal bad. EG has always had problems with this mid-game. It's something that they are going to need to continue to work on. That's something I think Inspired has always struggled with. Obviously, Rogue Time going to Evil Geniuses a little bit here, but JoJo in particular with these late-game decision-making, these late-game decisions that he is making, I think is also a little bit of the cause of the problem. And so just some mental mistakes that EG needs to clean up because they played this game really well. They just need to figure out and get more comfortable with closing out from major leads. I really don't have a lot of worry that this team is going to be able to do it. They just have to prove to me that they can do it with this iteration of the roster. And then for CLG, great win. I mean, come from behind win. You're down 10k gold. You've got to be super happy that you're able to win it, but it is worth noting that they did get themselves into a pretty major deficit. They should not have been in this game. The fact that they won this was honestly more on Evil Geniuses than it was on CLG. A great win for them, but it's not something that I'm going to sit here and be like, oh, CLG's a top 3 team in the league because they were able to beat Evil Geniuses. It's hard for me to really get behind that. They looked good and they did everything they needed to do. They knew their win conditions and they played towards them, but they really should have never been given the opportunity to do so in the first place. So good win from CLG, even if it wasn't entirely off the back of their own decisions. Moving on to game 2 here of day 2, and we had a little bit of a blowout as we saw a top team facing a bottom team. We saw Golden Guardians taking on Cloud9, and Cloud9 proven they really are the real deal this year. They absolutely dismantle a Golden Guardians team that didn't really look all that awful on day 1. Cloud9 just looking utterly dominant. I mean, Fudge is ridiculous. At some point, and I'm just going to skip to it, at some point, you gotta ban K'Sante against Cloud9. I feel like we're at the point where 2 games in, I've now seen 2 games of Fudge on this champion, and I never want to see it again if I'm the enemy team. It is just too strong, it is too broken. That champion is too good, it is everything that he wants to do. In lane, out of lane, everywhere. He is going to demolish the league if they continue to give it to him. He is player of the game here in game number 2. I gave it to him in game number 1, but he was even more dominant in game number 2 than he was in game number 1. 10-1-9 on K'Sante in pro, like, it's ludicrous. Great game from Fudge. He continues to look like one of the best top laners in the region. Absolutely destroying Licorice. He's someone who has always played Licorice specifically very tough because obviously he replaced Licorice, and so it always feels like he has a little bit of a chip to prove to play against Licorice. Obviously, Licorice was playing really well over the course of 2021. Not so much 2022. It feels like he's fallen off a bit. Fudge took advantage of that and absolutely brutalized him. They blind picked Jax, and I get it, right? Like, it's baiting the K'Sante pick because Jax himself beats K'Sante, and so you feel like, okay, well, if you're going to pick K'Sante, which we know you are, then I'm going to blind pick Jax, and I'm going to feel comfortable going into it because I know you're going to pick K'Sante. The problem is it doesn't matter. Like, the counter pick, quote-unquote, isn't strong enough for it to actually affect the game at all. It's just bad drafting, and I'll get to that on the side of the Golden Guardians. I hate this draft, like, with a passion, but Cloud9 played it really well, and K'Sante was utterly unstoppable in this game. Credit to Blabber as well. Again, another really good game from him on the Wukong, a very similar draft to what this team had in game number 1. No Akali, this time you go for the Sylas, and obviously a little bit more of an aggressive bot lane, or a carry-oriented bot lane rather than the Ashe that you had in game number 1. You go for the Zeri here, but for the most part, you're still facilitating the top side with Wukong. You're making sure that K'Sante can get ahead. He's going to be a super tank this game because the enemy team has decided to go full AD, and so you can just stack armor and you're never going to die. Similar thing with Wukong. Honestly, similar thing with Sylas to an extent. You can just build Zhonya's first item. There's really not a lot the enemy team can do. And I think Blabber did, in fact, play it well. He was there when his team needed him. Diplex outplaying a gank in mid lane from River. Blabber then deciding, oh, okay, maybe I should invest a little bit in Sylas as well. He does that, is able to get Diplex ahead. Fudge is already super ahead because he obliterated Licorice in lane. Berserker and Sven continue to be weak side, which is ridiculously good for this Cloud9 team. Overall, this is just basically exactly what you were looking for on the side of Cloud9 in game number 2. An absolute demolition from them. From Golden Guardians, this was disastrous. Everybody on this team played bad. Obviously, the solo laners in particular were not good. Licorice got run over in the top lane. He's going to be done to the game. Not really all that much of a thought process going through here for me. He played really bad on the Jax. You blind pick the Jax because you have a feeling they're going to go K'Sante. They call your bluff, go K'Sante anyways, and you still get absolutely blasted in lane. Never really a good sign on that front. Licorice has kind of been a huge problem for Golden Guardians over the past 6 months or so. I would say spring of last year was the last split. He was actually a competent and like pretty solid top laner in the LCS. Ever since then, it feels like he has just completely fallen off of a cliff, which is really, really unfortunate to say because I like Licorice a lot as a player and the history that he has in the LCS, but man, in recent months, he just has not been good. This was a great example of that. I mean, Fudge just got the better of him by a country mile, and it really wasn't even all that close. I do think that there were other candidates for dead of the game, most notably Young in the mid lane, of course. Unfortunate for Young that he has to go up against one of the best teams in the league in his time in the LCS, but he picks the Aurelia, which I just think is objectively the wrong choice here. You're looking at this comp. You're full AD. You're Jax, Aurelia, Sivir. You have no AP. You've got a tank in the jungle, and you've got a Yuumi to try and facilitate a late game for the Sivir. But the later this game goes, the less damage Sivir's actually going to be able to do because K'Sante and Wukong are going to be able to stack armor over and over and over again. And so you've basically drafted yourself into a corner where you're never really going to be winning late game, and you have a late game comp. And so you really don't have a way to win this game. Unfortunately, Young's Aurelia pick only exacerbated that issue. He was super useless in lane, was going for these super aggressive plays onto Diplex, onto the Sylas, but a really good job by Diplex to basically just outplay him in this game and just look better. Honestly, Young was not on that same level. I still think he's a good prospect, but definitely needs some seasoning before it's his time at the major league, the LCS level. River was bad on the Sejuani. This looked like an overmatched River. He looked really good in the first series of the year going into Inspired, where it felt like he could kind of control his own tempo. This game was just a disaster. You had one really bad gank in the mid lane, and it was over from there. 6A and Huhi were just not as good as Berserker and Sven in the bottom lane. Basically, everybody on Golden Guardians lost with a draft that was basically unwinnable. Not really a lot to analyze here. This is just a bad game from Golden Guardians. If they look like this rather than what they looked like on day 1, they will probably be a bottom 2, bottom 1, even maybe team in the league, right? This was a horrendous performance, but there is still upside for this team. River played well in game 1. Young is going to be switched out for Gory, and I think that will give you some upside as soon as he gets here to North America. There are still avenues where Golden Guardians can be a competitive team, but they certainly did not show it in this game. And then for Cloud9, on the other hand, good win for them. I mean, this is basically what you're looking for. Fudge dominating on the top side, Blabber continuing to look very fantastic in the jungle, and Diplex, honestly, outplaying his mid lane opponent incredibly hard. That top side of the map is what you were questioning when it came to Cloud9 and whether or not they could consistently be the best team in the league, because Berserker is going to be good, and Sven is going to be able to prop him up. Cloud9 looks basically unbeatable right now if Fudge is going to continue to play like this, and that's a really, really scary, scary prospect for a lot of the other teams in the league. Moving on to game 3 now of day 2. Ooh, man, am I excited to talk about this one, because there were some parts in this game that I really was excited to talk about on this channel. I don't want to waste too much time with these intros, so let's go ahead and get into it. We had Team Liquid taking on TSM, and TSM picks up an absolutely massive win here in game number 2 for them. Obviously, being able to beat Immortals on day 1 is good, but it's not like beating Immortals is going to skyrocket you up my power rankings. Beating Team Liquid is a huge win for this TSM team. TL looks in bad shape. That's the best way I can possibly put it, but man, TSM really taking advantage of all of the mistakes that TL is making here. So let's talk about them first. You're looking at this roster, and I think a lot of people were looking at it as, oh, well, you know, a lot of good players, not really any great players. Potentially someone like Boogie could show up and be really, really solid in the jungle, but, you know, and I like Chime a lot, but even then, like Neo, Maple, they don't really inspire a ton of confidence in terms of being able to win games on their own. It doesn't matter. When you're playing against TLCK, Maple's gonna show up. Maple, obviously known as the Korean killer back in his days here on Flash Wolves in the LMS. That seems like it is translated here to TSM. He always played better against the LCK at Worlds, and man, did that show up against TLCK here. In this one, Maple's going to get my player of the game on Azir. Really, really good performance from him. He's someone who I've been pretty down on in his time in the LCS. I actually think he was a little bit of a weak link for this TSM team last year. Was relatively stable, but certainly was not winning games for TSM. I think that he won this game for TSM. Now, you could give that to quite a few people, the player of the game, that is. Maple is the one that I give it to because his damage in the back half of these team fights really felt super influential, and I think from start to finish, he was the most important player of this game, but I think when you're talking about the biggest plays made in this game, that was absolutely Chime on this Ashe. Now, I was really worried about Chime in the first couple of minutes in this game because he did not play the laning phase particularly well on this Ashe. Ashe Kalista is a strong lane, but it does need a bit, you know, of execution to work. You can't just kind of pick up and play it quite like Lucian Nami. You do actually need to know how to execute the bot lane a little bit, and I don't think they were quite as familiar with how laning phase worked, but those arrows from mid-game onward from Chime were game-winning from TSM. I mean, he was hitting everybody he needed to. He was hitting the Lucian, he was hitting the Sejuani, he was getting pick after pick after pick after pick with those arrows. Chime was phenomenal in this game, and I've talked about him for over a year now, how Chime is secretly one of the best supports in North America, and he has been for quite a while. I think people are really starting to wake up to how good he is, and how he could potentially break his way into kind of like the All-Pro conversation as the season goes on. He was in my All-Pro conversation last year. If he had played the full split, he probably would have made my All-Pro team, but he really has been that good over the course of the last 6 months. If he's able to keep that up, and if he's able to play like he did in the second half of this game throughout the rest of the season, I mean, he's going to be an absolute killer in North America. I mean, the rest of the team is really bouncing off of him super well. I think him and Neo actually have a very good duo relationship in the bot lane. Neo isn't someone who's going to play super aggressive in laning phase. Chime, someone who is going to play relatively aggressive in laning phase. Chime was a lot better as a roamer. I think Neo can play weak side relatively okay. Overall, I just think that this duo is going to bring out the best in each other. At least that's what we've seen through the first 2 games, and I think both of them are going to outperform the rankings that I gave them. I made Chime, I think, my number 6 support in the region, and Neo was my number 10 ranked AD carry. Neither will be that low by the end of the season. Both of them are playing great, and then, again, big credit to Maple. I can't stress this enough. He did so much damage on that Azir in the late game teamfight. As much as I'm hyping up Chime, Maple is still my player of the game here. He was fantastic. Solo in the top lane on the Ornn, I mean, he's just super stable. Not really much else you could ask for him. He is just outplaying Summit in this game, which, again, we'll get into in a second, but that's 2 games in a row now that Summit has been outplayed. And then Boogie was also good. He made a few mistakes in the mid game, but still, overall, an incredibly positive impact on TSM. When it comes to TL, I don't know when you start hitting the panic button. I don't think it is now. I think you're like 1 game away, though. I don't think you're necessarily super far away from being like, okay, this is not working. What do we need to change? Maybe not in terms of players, but in terms of approach, because the top side of this map is not good. Like, there's really no other way to put it. If you would have asked me, you know, if you would have told me that TL was going to go 0-2 in the opening week, I would have been like, oh, Harry and Jan just did not get the hang of playing in the LCS. They're going to need some time to develop and kind of get to that level. It really hasn't been Harry and Jan. Both of them were fine in the first week. Harry was really good in game 1. He definitely made some mistakes here in game 2, got hit by some Ashe arrows he probably shouldn't have, and Jan was actually pretty good. Jan and Core JJ did a really good job in lane of actually being able to capitalize on the Lucian Nami power spike. It's the top top two here, it's Summit and Pyosik that are just not good. Like, they're just not playing well. Pyosik constantly behind in terms of pressure. Boogie got the early push on him, and Pyosik is one of the worst players in the world from behind. That's always been a problem that he has had, is he's really good from ahead and not so good playing from behind. And then Summit was awful in this game. There is no other way to put it. Summit's my dud of the game, got completely outplayed by Solo in lane. You're playing the tank versus tank matchup. It's a little bit boring, but for Solo to be up like 20 CS, that's not good at all. And then for him to have no impact on these team fights, no peel for the Lucian, no peel for the Akali, absolutely nothing in these team fights from Summit. It's just disappointing. This is someone who a lot of people hyped up coming into the league, being one of the best top laners in the region basically from day one. Because he should be. He was the last time he was in North America last year, and so there really is no reason for him to be getting dominated quite like this. He needs to figure it out. Him and Pyosik both absolutely need to figure it out, because if they don't get on the same page, if they're not going to step up their game, TL is not going to be a good team this split. Like, they're just not. Like, Harry, Yon, Core, they're not going to be able to carry this team to the heights that they probably want to hit. Like, this is a team that wants to be top 3, top 4 at the very worst. But right now, I don't even know if they're top 6. Like, that is a concerning thing to say. Summit has been really bad. Pyosik has done really nothing. He was really bad in game 1, but he was completely just overmatched here in game number 2. And Harry, Yon, and Core are not going to be able to step up and take that. So for TL, you haven't quite hit panic mode just yet because it's week 1. Obviously, some of these players are maybe going to need some time to get used to playing with each other. But if you're sitting at the end of week 2 at 1-3 or 0-4 or something like that, maybe you are hitting the panic button. Maybe you're saying like, okay, well, if we can't fall behind like this early. We have to start getting some wins under our belt. And I think that's going to have to start as quickly as possible for Team Liquid. For TSM, though, 2-0 start. What year is it? This is a great start to the year for TSM. Their team actually just looks really cohesive and really strong. Boogie has meshed really well, and so has Neo with a lot of the other players on this team. Maple really showed up in this game. Not sure if that's going to be consistent throughout the whole year, but I'm not even really sure it needs to be. If Neo's going to be great on weak side and Chime is going to be this good at support in terms of the team fighting, if you can have a carry-oriented jungler like Boogie and someone stable on the top side, you're going to be able to take a lot of games against some good teams in this league, just like they did in this one. And so overall, you got to be looking at TSM as maybe a little bit of a dark horse potential top 6 team. Certainly not something I predicted going into the season, but they have played way above expectations so far in the league. Moving on to our 4th game here of day 2. Another interesting one between two teams that didn't quite pick up a win on day number 1. We had 100 Thieves taking on Immortals. And 100 Thieves is able to pick up the win. Now, this was super needed for this team. Obviously, they did not want to start the year 0-2, especially to Immortals. That would have been pretty disastrous, as we'll get to it, but Immortals is quite clearly just the worst team in the league. They really don't have the same kind of pressure that anybody else in the league has. There are a lot of teams that are competitive, at least in these games, even a team like Golden Guardians, and we've seen what TSM can do. You know, some teams that maybe weren't projected. Immortals, maybe not so much on that scale, but good for 100 Thieves to be able to pick up this win. Player of the game for me in this, quite frankly, stomp, like this really strong win from 100 Thieves. I'm not quite sure if I'll call it a stomp, although I do think it's quite in that zone. And my player of the game is actually going to go to Doublelift. Yes, I'm praising Doublelift on this channel. And as longtime viewers know, I apparently don't do that very often on this channel. It's certainly not intentional. I just feel like sometimes the hype gets a little out of control, but this is what the hype was about. Like, this is the kind of game you were looking for. Flashing forward on Zeri, playing ridiculously aggressive and just kind of destroying Tactical in lane and mentally, I think, as well. Obviously, quite the history between these two players. Doublelift was eventually replaced on Team Liquid by Tactical. They would go on to have a much better year with Tactical than they would with Doublelift, and then he would go on to TSM, and they would have some battles in the playoffs as well that year. But yeah, for Doublelift to come back and have his best game so far in the first 2, playing against Tactical, definitely felt like it was purposeful. It did not feel like it was an accident, especially with how this game kind of went down. Doublelift would actively not try and kill the Lulu in order to go all in on Tactical and on this Sivir. Very, very funny to watch, but still, definitely you can feel that sting definitely exists a little bit for Doublelift still. He was really good in this game. So was Busio on the Yuumi, although only so good you can look on the Yuumi, in my opinion. Great game from Closer. Great step back, in my opinion, or bounce back from the first game of the year against Cloud9. He kind of got out-jungled by Blabber pretty easily in game number 1, in my opinion. And game number 2, he definitely looked a lot better than Kenvi, although Kenvi was making some plays around the map on this Wukong. I think for the most part, there really just wasn't a lot that he could do. Closer was better than him. Players like Tenacity, Bjergsen, while they weren't exactly the focal points for the team, definitely still very good for 100 Thieves overall. It was definitely more of a bot lane focused win for 100 T. As for Immortals, disaster strikes. I mean, they're just bad. Like, what else do you really want me to say about them? They are not a good League of Legends team. Tactical and Fleshy might be the single worst bot lane in North America. Fleshy, I think, has only died once through their first 2 losses, but that's because no one actually cares about him. He played Pyke in game number 1 and just got completely ignored in all these fights. He played Lulu in game number 2 and just got completely ignored in all of these fights. It's almost like he doesn't exist, which might even be worse than getting perma-targeted. Like, it's not even like he's positioning in a way where he can't be targeted. People just don't care to kill him. Tactical has been very, very bad. He got completely run over by Doublelift in this game. Like I said, it felt personal, and it definitely feels like it got to the mental of Tactical. He looks like the worst AD carry in the region, again, just like he did last year. Now, obviously, he still has the upside of what he was just a couple of years ago. If he can remotely get his mental and his confidence back, then maybe he can slowly start to chip away at what he was in 2020 and in 2021. But right now, Tactical looks unplayable. Like, he looks like someone who needs to be subbed out, which is problematic because Immortals doesn't really have this superstar AD carry in the NACL either, although I do like Wixie. I don't think he's some sort of superstar. He's a good player, just not a great one, and a Blaze Olive in the mid lane is also kind of a problem for this Immortals team. He's going to get my dud of the game here, although I think very realistically you could give it to Tactical. It's going to go to ABO for me because he just continues to have basically 0 impact on the game. He tries to play really aggro on champions like Azir, and it's just not working out. He's not able to really keep up with the rest of the mid laners in the region, and that's just, it is what it is, right? You're now looking at this duo of Blaze Olive and Tactical as the worst mid-jungle duo in the league by a considerable margin, and that is problematic for Immortals. I keep using that term because I don't really have a better one. Like, everything so far this year has been problematic. They are major issues, major problems that this Immortals team actually has to tackle before I feel like they're even going to be competitive in a lot of these games. Blaze Olive got run over by Bjergsen. In lane, he was targeted heavily in team fights by Closer, and then Tactical was also completely running it. Even if Revenge was also bad, and Kenvi was sometimes in bad positions, and Fleshy wasn't playing all that well, to me, Blaze Olive and Tactical are the 2 players that stand out the most as the players struggling the most on Immortals right now. I think if this team actually does want to win some games, they might actually just need to look at replacing these 2 players as quickly as possible because, truthfully, right now, it is just simply not working. It is not winnable with these 2 players on the team. But overall, outlook-wise, Immortals, I came in at number 10 in my power rankings to start the year. They are going to stay there until further notice. They look like the worst team in the league by a large, large margin. And I don't really think there's going to be a lot that changes that. Good win for 100 Thieves, although it is against the worst team in the league, so how much can you really take away from it? But Doublelift continues to look really strong to start the year, and I think Closer had a much better game number 2 than he did game number 1. Bjergsen plays solid, Tenacity plays solid, Busiel looked good on the Yuumi. This is kind of what you wanted to see as a game number 2, especially when game number 1 didn't go perfectly, and so they kind of just took care of business. Not the most surprising win of all time, but a good one for them nonetheless. That's going to bring us to our final game here of day number 2 here, game number 5, and it was a good one. It was a matchup between FlyQuest and Dignitas, and FlyQuest picks up another incredibly strong victory to kick their season off here. Another team going 2-0. There seem to be a lot of those in the LCS right now, which means there are a lot of 0-2s, but really good start to the year for FlyQuest in general. I mean, this team might just be the best team in the league without really that much competition. They look incredibly strong in their wins. Basically, every question mark that you could have had about this team has been proven at this point. And the biggest one, and the biggest, feel-good moment already has to be Prince, right? Like, oh my god, he is everything that we could have wanted in North America, plus some. I mean, this has got to be the debut weekend for Prince. He's going to get player of the game here against Dignitas. He got to go up against Spawn in this game, and that's just an unfair matchup. As much as I like Spawn, you can't really expect Spawn to be going up against Prince and be able to hold his own without jungle interference, and there was no jungle interference. It was Prince's Ezreal against Spawn's Varus, and there was no shot Prince was not going to get ridiculously fed and strong in this game. Prince is just on a different level than pretty much every other AD carry in North America. Maybe, hopefully, with the exception of Berserker, who is going to be a super fun matchup to keep watch of. I cannot wait for FlyQuest and Cloud9. That is going to be the match that I think all of us are looking forward to, but Prince in particular just looks unreal. He didn't even have his support, his main support, for the first couple of games here. Obviously, Winsome filled in, and he filled in great. Like, he played really, really well on this team. But once Ayla gets in, I feel like it's going to be even bigger of an upgrade for FlyQuest, and they could just be genuinely unbeatable. That bot lane could just be unstoppable at that point. But then you look at the mid lane here, Vikla. I still am a little bit more questionable about Vikla than I think some other people are. Had a really good game here on the Sylas, though. Completely dominated Jensen. Completely baited him with that stopwatch play mid-game here and just kind of caused Jensen to die and caused basically Dignitas to lose a ton of pressure on the map because of that. Really big props to Vikla. He's a very talented player. I just want to see if he's going to be someone that needs to be carried by the rest of the team, or if he's someone who can actively be like the main carry for them, because he really probably won't have to be for a majority of the season. Prince is obviously going to be strong side on the bot side, but Impact can win games. Speak of can win games, I just want to see if Vikla can consistently like win games as the primary carry. Luckily, I think surrounding him on this team will never really have to know whether or not he can do that, but that's always just been my major question mark with Vikla, as he feels like a dominant role player, but maybe not someone who can be like a superstar at this level. That kind of felt a little bit wrong in this game. Hopefully I'm wrong. I'd love to be wrong. It's something I want to be wrong about. And so if he can continue to play at a super high level, that's going to be fun. Spica looks great on the Maokai. Obviously, Impact gets Cassante. That's a champion right up his alley. Pretty much everybody on FlyQuest is clicking right now, and genuinely, they do just look like the best team in the LCS. As for Dignitas, another really rough loss for them. Not going to blame it too much on them. They're playing a really good team here, but this team is not the team that we thought they were going to be going into the year. I had them top 6. I just don't know if they're going to be top 6. A lot of the problems that I brought up in my Power Rankings video and talked about earlier in the week as well have definitely come to fruition for Dignitas, with the fact that players like Santorin and Jensen, if they're your best players, you're going to need somebody for them to facilitate in order for the team to really work in that way. And Spawn just has not clicked with the rest of the team quite like that. He's my dud of the game again here in game number 2 for Dignitas. He needed a better week 1. It was certainly not a great start to the year for him. I think things are going to get a little bit easier as we move into some easier teams for them to face, but Spawn himself not necessarily looking great in this week 1. Got completely outplayed by Prince. It was basically just a dog pile in that bottom lane. Spawn got run over in the 2v2, he got run over in the 3v3, and he got run over in the 5v5. He really did nothing this game, and that's definitely a little disappointing. I still think he can be a decent player at this level, but I think I'm starting to learn where his ceiling might lie as a player. He's probably never going to be a top 4, top 5 AD carry here. He might be just a solid, 8 or a 7 or 8 AD carry, a 6A caliber player at this level, if you will. Kind of a player that you can win with, but not someone that you might win because of. And that's not a bad thing, just that might be what Spawn ends up being. As for Santorin and Jensen, both of them just kind of got outplayed here. Santorin was not on the same level as Spica because the rest of his lanes were completely pushed in. And Jensen just got styled on by Vikla in that one play, but really never had anything outside of that. Armid on the Olaf, not really a ton that he was going to be able to do in this game. Overall, genuinely speaking, I just don't know where Dignitas is going to find a ton of wins this year. You're really going to need someone like Jensen to be like this hyper carry level player, which he just hasn't shown that he can be, probably since he left Cloud9 the first time, right? When he went to TL, he was the secondary carry, kind of okay player. And then he went to, obviously, Cloud9 last year and was definitely more of a supportive player, someone who was just kind of there to enable the jungle. He's going to need to pick up a lot of the slack here. Arma is also someone who's probably going to need to pick up a lot of the slack, but I just don't know if I can reliably count on those two players to be someone that can win you games consistently against some of the best teams in the league in the LCS. And as we saw in this game, I don't know if they're going to be able to do it. And so overall, looking at these two teams, Dignitas looks like a lower-ish tier team than maybe I was giving them credit for. Some of the teams below them definitely outperformed them this week, and I think the power rankings are definitely going to show that. But for FlyQuest, they just might be the best team in all of the LCS. Pretty much every question mark that you could have had about this roster going into the year has been solved at this point. They look phenomenal. Every single player that they imported or that they brought in and needed a bounce back from, in Spica's case, has just been sensational. Vikla and Prince could be the best mid-jungle or mid-ADC combo in the league. Spica, I think, fit well into this team. Impact is looking like he's having a fantastic start to the year. Pretty much everything is going right for FlyQuest, and they don't even have Ayla, who is another player that I'm ridiculously excited for, on the roster yet. So, I mean, the sky is the limit for FlyQuest, and they're very, very, very quickly reaching that sky. Alright, that is going to do it for my LCS Week 1 overview and analysis up on your screen. Right now, you're going to see the updated LCS standings, of course, Only 2 games have happened, so not really a lot to look at in terms of the standings, but there is something to look at in terms of the power rankings. If you look at the first column on the right, you're going to see my updated power rankings, and you're going to see in the second column how those have changed from last week, which was, of course, the preseason, to now. So let's go over some of the biggest risers, some of the biggest fallers. A lot of changes this week, but not a lot of sweeping changes. Some teams are still going to stay within the top 6. Some teams are going to fall out of the top 6. I'm going to be a little bit hesitant putting some good teams that have played well so far into the top 6, just because week 1 is usually crazy for a lot of teams, and I want to see the consistency. If this continues on with a lot of these teams, which I'll talk about in a bit, I'm going to be more willing to make those changes, but I don't want to overreact to one bad week of games from one team. So let's talk about it. FlyQuest jumping up to number 1 here, jumping 2 spots, and EG dropping down to number 3. They just switched places. They're still in that same tier, in my opinion. EG is going to need a little bit more time, I think, to get their, get their shit together, quite frankly. I was going to curse, and then I wasn't going to curse, and then I did it anyways. But I think EG is going to take a little bit more time to get together. I think FlyQuest is there right now. Fly and C9 are pretty clearly the top 2 teams in the region. I think EG is right there with them at number 3. I have 100 Thieves jumping up to number 4, and CLG jumping up from number 7 to number 5. Both looking okay this week, not necessarily dominant. Now, where it starts to get a little bit tricky, he's number 6. Of course, 6 is the last playoff spot for spring. I personally have Team Liquid still in there. I think, theoretically speaking, they should be able to turn this around and still make it, but if they have another bad week, I am going to hit the panic button and drop them out of there. TSM is right on their heels at number 7, the best team outside of the playoffs, quote-unquote, right now, in my opinion. Dignitas drops to number 8, and my 2 bottom teams are Golden Guardians and Immortals, which I don't think will shock a lot of people. Obviously, all of the teams here have the potential to beat basically anybody. It is wide open in the LCS right now, and I think that makes for some really fun games. As for my player of the week and my dud of the week, my player of the week, no surprise to a lot of people, is going to go to Fudge on Cloud9, who just was sensational in week 1. He absolutely destroyed people with that Cassante. He destroyed Tenacity in game number 1, and most specifically destroyed Closer in that game number 1, and then continued to destroy Licorice, as he has done for quite a while in that game number 2. I don't expect he will be able to get that champion a lot, but if Fudge continues to play like one of the best top laners in the region, this team is going to continue to look completely and utterly dominant on that side of the map. My dud of the week, unfortunately, is going to go to Tactical on Immortals. That Immortals team just looks completely hapless right now, and Tactical is a big part of that. He may just be the worst AD carry and the worst carry player in the league right now. He's going to need to step it up. Obviously, we know he has the talent to do so. It's just one bad week. He just needs to make sure he can keep his confidence at least at a remotely okay level, because that always has felt like it's the problem with Tactical. It's never really been a talent thing. It has been a confidence thing. So hopefully he can regain that as the season goes on. But that is going to do it. Let me know what you guys thought of the video down in the comments section below. Of course, let me know, what team am I overrating? What team am I underrating? Who is your player of the week? Who is your dud of the week? I love to hear you guys' thoughts down in the comment section below. Just, of course, keep it as a discussion and not just like you yelling at me for making a decision. And, of course, if you did enjoy the video, go ahead and hit that like button. It really does mean a lot for the channel. If you're new, hit the subscribe button. I not only put out LCS content, but NACL content if you like North America, and then also all 3 of the other major regions, LEC, LCK, LPL, every single week. So if you're interested in that, hit the subscribe button. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.